Hi, Therese. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm so happy to be with you again. It's wonderful to see you.
Me too. I'm very happy. Why don't you tell us what you'd like us to learn?
Well, today I wanted to share with you the project I worked on called the Golden Age of Aquarius. It's a book that's called Ancient Civilizations in Ascended Master Culture, and it goes along with a website called goldenageofaquarius.com, www.goldenageofaquarius.com. And it's a fascinating and extraordinary walk through the last 4 million years, I believe. I couldn't say billion, I think it was million. Yes, million. Anyway, the point is that we revisit all of the ancient times having to do with Lemuria and Atlantis and many other ancient civilizations of light. We also go into some of the challenges that happened that led to cataclysm. And if we want to go back to billions, we're actually also looking in this book at the wars of the worlds that took place on various planets and in situations in our solar system and even beyond our solar system. It's like Star Wars 2.0, but it's really very, very important to understand because we're looking at all of this from an esoteric perspective, which basically means that the aperture of our vision is greater than what we see with our two eyes, and we understand from that there has been and is still life evolving on other planets, on other dimensions or frequencies of existence, which is levels of the etheric plane, or in some cases, the astral plane. And and so in these other levels of evolution and other planetary systems, we find very similar battles of light and darkness. We find souls engaged with the beings of great light that we know as the ascended masters. And then we find those that have moved into realms of darkness, including robot creation and everything else that we see happening, converging right now in our daily news feed. It's extraordinarily timely to understand what's going on because we see all of this happening and we see the golden age. The term golden age has come to preeminence lately, and there's a lot more to understand about golden age than what first meets the eye, right? We know from our current history or the history work we learn in school that there people associate golden age with like the ancient Greeks and the golden age of Greece and other civilizations in more recent times. And they definitely had golden age elements. But when we start to dig into the deeper history of golden ages, we find that there's a tremendous amount more to learn, and that these civilizations, for instance, the Greek civilization, were just basically um, a remnant or a copy or trying to reclaim or redeem what was once upon a time. And so to do this work and to do it as properly as possible, I went back to all of the Ascended Master teachings that I could find. And I, of course, went through the libraries of the Summit Lighthouse, but I also went through the teachings that were given through the I Am dispensation, the I Am movement, and the Bridge to Freedom. And I also looked at other corroborating books. For example, Philos the Tibetan and his books, Dweller on the Two Planets. This is one that Elizabeth Clare Prophet often taught from. I also looked at Edgar Cayce and some of what he explained about Atlantis, and looked at some of the works by Taylor Caldwell, especially The Romance of Atlantis and the Dialogues with the Devil. Taylor Caldwell was a child who remembered things from the Akashic records, and she was spoken about through the teachings of the Ascended Masters in the Summit Lighthouse and the Master El Morya, actually, encourage people to read her books. And there's a lot of truth in these books. And so when you start to put all of these resources together, you get a very, very interesting saga, a very interesting story. And I wanted to share a little bit of that with you today, if that works for you, what I've learned.
Sure.
And yeah,
I do have some questions.
yeah.
Um, so we can clear it up quickly. You mentioned etheric and astral plane and Akashic records. Maybe you could describe.
Oh, sure. And so the etheric plane are the levels of the heaven world that are congruent with the physical plane. They are levels that are invisible to our eyes, but that are in a higher frequency and that souls can go to either during sleep or in between embodiments. And there are Golden Age cities happening on the etheric plane as we speak. There are etheric retreats throughout the world where masters and angels serve and where souls are being tutored and taught and given the next level of their divine plan. So that's the etheric plane. Dante described the etheric plane, and others have as well when they talk about the various levels of heaven. The seventh level or higher, it actually goes up to 33 levels. The astral plane is the flip side of that. The astral plane is where we're moving into the planes of hell, and the astral plane ties in through our astral body or our emotional body, whereas the etheric plane ties in through our etheric body, which is also called our deathless solar body. And so in the astral plane, we see a descending vibration that can go very, very dark. Um, and so there are various levels of the astral plane from the higher levels, which are a kaleidoscope of seduction to the darkest, deepest levels of hell. And so, what was the other term you wanted me to define?
Sure, the Akashic records.
The Akashic records. So, the Akashic records, everything that we think and say and do, everything that transpires in our life and that we are responsible for, is impressed upon a spiritual substance, which is called akasha. And so nothing that we do is hidden. Like Jesus said, the truth shall be shouted from the housetops. Nothing is hidden, and everything is basically printed at a spiritual level. And we know there are recording angels and others who work with the Akashic records. So when we look at history, the true history of what happened has been basically recorded in these Akashic records throughout time, and not just for this planet, but for other systems of world, for the entire universe, for the entire matter cosmos of God's creation. And so in the etheric retreats of the heaven world, we're told that the masters, together with their students, can go and look at any event that took place in history, whether it's your personal history, your personal soul history, or the planetary history, and see what actually took place. And sometimes it's going to be congruent with what we read in history books, and sometimes there's been revisionist history and not necessarily congruency between what is recorded and what actually took place. But the Akashic records never fail. So if a person has the ability, which is a spiritual gift, to tie into or tune into the Akashic records, like Taylor Caldwell did, even as a young child, she can see and perceive records of what actually took place and describe them. And this is how her writing came about, which was fascinating for like a 12-year-old girl to have all of this in-depth information about Atlantis and so forth, for example, and the relationships that were going on and everything else. And so yes, we look at the Akashic records too. And Elizabeth Clare Prophet and Mark Prophet were both able also to read the Akashic records, and likely other messengers have as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's see, continuing on. Well, the book begins with a history of our solar system. We talk about the various battles that took place and events that took place, and in our solar system in particular, it involved a certain amount of planets, some which are still in our solar system and which some of which are no longer a part of our system. We're talking about Hadron, which was taken down. It was a planet close to the sun that was taken down, meaning ultimately dissolved or destroyed. And the energy of that planet had to do with, that destroyed or took down that planet had to do with hedonism. But there was which is the pleasure cult. But there was a very beautiful, beautiful life on Hadron that Gautama Buddha describes before that took place, before the destruction took place, where people were walking, souls were walking one with God, very close to the sun, which is the solar emanation of our Father, Mother God, Helios and Vesta, and twin flames working together, and beautiful elemental nature kingdom and so forth. And it was so beautiful, but eventually people started to rest upon their laurels, and they stopped progressing, and little by little the dark forces started to come in, and this is one of the things that we can read in Dialogues with the Devil as well, where Taylor Caldwell describes an actual conversation between Archangel Michael and the fallen Lucifer. And Lucifer explains how he takes over planets, how the fallen ones take over planets. And it's a very, very interesting description, very, very revelatory. So we're looking at that. So Hadron was one of the planets that no longer existed, and there are asteroid belts near the sun. Some people believe that's part of the remnants of Hadron. Then we look at Venus had certain battles, and the life on Venus continues now at the etheric plane, and it's the home of Sanat Kumara, Lady Master Venus, and many, many souls of light. In fact, many souls of light came through various systems of worlds like Hadron, Mercury, Venus, and so forth. Mercury was another planet that has been evolving towards a golden age in the etheric plane. It's very, again, close to the sun, and people have a very accelerated mental ability. The Mercurians, Hermes, Mercurius, Trismegistus, and the Mercurians have a very, very extraordinary command of the mind of God. And so there were also battles on Mercury, like the Master El Morya talks to us about the robot creation that tried to take over that planet, and the inhabitants had to move against or overcome robot creation by really focusing on the mind of God. And so I know as I'm saying some of these things, people are going to be like, wow, this is like pretty intense, crazy, maybe even, but remember, Mark Twain said, and we see this coming out in our news every day now, that truth is stranger than fiction, and that is true. And I think what's important is, of course, the details are important, but the theme is even more important, the theme of what happened. There was a beautiful planet that was evolving between Mars and Jupiter called Maldek, and for a long time that planet focused the energies of the Divine Mother. And then that planet was taken over by fallen ones who had also come from these other systems. And eventually that planet annihilated itself through nuclear weaponry and other advanced forms of weaponry, which are returning in this time to Earth and are also described in the book Dialogues with the Devil. And these advanced systems of weaponry can literally obliterate planets. And what we have now, where Maldek was, is an asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. And so the souls, a lot of the souls that were on that planet were no longer allowed to reincarnate, went through the spiritual end called the second death of the soul. But about a third of them that were not as dark or as bent on evil were allowed to incarnate on Earth. And so what was going on with Earth was that we had initially a very beautiful, idyllic kind of golden age reality that took place even in the earliest days of what we now know as Lemuria. And I believe that was about 4 million years ago. There was a touchdown of angels that happened near where the Grand Teton now stands, and there was the Garden of Eden as well, and which was a mystery school, and souls were evolving to become more light, to become more advanced in their God consciousness, to master time and space, and ultimately return home to God in the ritual of the ascension. And a certain three groups of souls called root races effectively had that achievement. And then following that, when the fourth root race of souls came in, there was the fall of the angels that took place, where the angels started to incarnate. The fallen angels started coming into the planet, and then the Maldekians also started coming in. And even though they had tremendous amount of attainment in certain areas of Christ consciousness, they also had a tremendous amount of attainment in manipulation of divine law, manipulation of physical space, manipulation of and weapons of war, and everything else. And so we started seeing very early on, even in Lemuria, like within, I think, a couple 100,000 years, a perversion and a corruption that took place. And this corruption was on every level. It was scientific, it was in the realms of science, genetic engineering, and all of that. It was in the areas of religion. A tremendous amount of perversion started to happen in the field of religion as well, because that was an area of power. And false priests or darkened priests took over. And this went on in all different aspects of light. And Lemuria was intended to be the land of the Divine Mother, the land of Mu, the land of the Mother. And eventually there was the murder of the Divine Mother. That was one of the final moments of that continent, where the Divine Mother and the flame of the Divine Mother left the earth at that point, the powerful flame of the Divine Mother. And it has not fully returned. It's returning, but it has not yet fully returned, actually. And that was a tremendous sadness, and you could say an achievement for the dark side, but it was a tremendous detriment to the souls of planet Earth. Then the continent sank in one night, and we were told that the priests were singing Auld Lang Syne. That melody, Auld Lang Syne, comes back from those days of Lemuria. And so following that, there were a few islands left, and the entire beauty of that civilization, which was very advanced, temples and beautiful buildings. And I give an entire description in the book of everything I could find on Lemuria, it all went under the ocean. These gas belts exploded, and the whole continent went down in one night. And so then people, went to cannibalism and other things after that. I mean, there was a tremendous regression of consciousness, and the horrible stuff that we see emerging even these days, which is completely antichrist. But this is not the first time around. So then we understand that while this took place, the Earth is a large sphere, and so there were other continents rising while some were falling, and Atlantis was beginning. Atlantis had different areas of land that stretched around the planet, but primarily, especially at the end, the primary area was right in the Atlantic Ocean. The final island of Poseidon is, there are maps in the book that you can look at, and that gives you a better idea. But a similar story took place on Atlantis. Now we're dealing with the incarnation of a new group of souls, as well as the fourth root race. There were fifth root race and so forth. New souls coming in with new abilities and dispensations. And Atlantis developed a tremendous amount of technology, science, architecture. There was a lot. The religion was highly advanced in many ways, but and the science in some ways even more so. I mean, some of these descriptions that you find in the book really give you a very good understanding of what life was like on Atlantis. Now, given the fact that we're looking at, I think, a couple 100,000 years of evolution, and so there were rises and falls of civilizations within Atlantis. Jesus was actually embodied on Atlantis as a Golden Age emperor at one point, and then came back a second time, and also as a Golden Age emperor, but this time for a shorter time. And he brought forth the Maxim light, which is a spiritual light, which was on the altars and burned on the altars. And instead of being cremated, souls would be put into the Maxim light, and it was a purifying energy of God that literally translated everything up into the etheric plane. And so Atlantis had a lot of wonderful temples. There was a violet flame temple on what is around or near or over the island of Cuba. It was the temple of Archangel Zadkiel. And the violet flame burned very brightly and could be seen from many miles away. And unfortunately, that temple again got corrupted by false or dark priests, and this was a theme that happened again and again: the takeover of the temples, the takeover of science, the bringing in of advanced warfare, the warring of various tribes and civilizations and cultures and all of that. And at the end, the temple of Archangel Zadkiel had to be removed to the etheric plane. And so we see this action happening also in the Golden Age civilization that took place in Shambhala, when Sanat Kumara and volunteers from the planet Venus, soul volunteers, came to try to assist Earth in the transitional time when man had devolved to a very dark place of basically crawling around on all fours. And they came to stoke up and to reignite and to hold the balance for the threefold flame in the heart, the flame of divinity. And these this civilization went on for a while, and it was a great blessing. Gautama Buddha was there, and Jesus and Sanat Kumara, and many of the ones that we know as world avatars. And then at a certain point, there was a whole group of people called the realists who decided that they didn't want to go along with this anymore. They wanted to be realists and not be enmeshed in the etheric plane, because you have to understand that to have that connection with the etheric plane and to have that connection with the masters, there is also a certain code of conduct that is required, and a certain amount of spiritual dignity that has to be upheld, and that includes the laws having to do with the sacred fire, which are the sexual energies and so forth. And so we see again and again people rebelling against that. We see this in the book of Enoch, where the children of Seth came down the mountain and wanted to party, and then couldn't find their way back up the mountain because they were just met with spiritual fire. We see this when Shambhala was taken up, when the realists decided that they wanted a realistic life. Well, the entire kingdom was literally sublimated into the etheric plane. This happened, when the various temples on Atlantis, like Zadkiel's temple and others that were taken up before the cataclysm and the final cataclysms of Atlantis. This happened in other civilizations as well. We can read about the civilizations in the Sahara Desert, where the master, who is now known as Saint Germain, was the ruler of that Golden Age civilization, and it went on for quite a number of years, I believe a few thousand, and then they eventually, that civilization also went away through cataclysm, and we now have the Sahara Desert. We had the same thing happening in the Amazon. In the Amazon basin, we had the civilization of Casimir Poseidonus, and some extraordinary civilizations in South America that once again were ultimately destroyed, some by neighboring cataclysms, like when Atlantis went down, and some on their own because of the perversions. For example, there was an ancient civilization in the Amazon jungle where the term Amazon comes from, and it was run eventually by women. And there were some of the masters that we know, like the goddess of liberty, was a part of the Amazonian culture of women. But then that civilization devolved, and eventually it was destroyed and swallowed up by jungle, because what we do creates karma, and when we misuse God's energy, the karma comes back through cataclysm, or can come back through cataclysm. And so the final days of Atlantis sank in three times, three different times, and the final one of Poseidonus was around 10,000 years ago, between 10 and 11,000. There are different dates given, and then at that time, those who were the adepts, like Serapis Bey and others, took the flames, some of the flames that were on the altars, and transferred them over to ancient Egypt. So Serapis Bey, Serapis Soleil, he explains that he had to literally take the flame in his heart, that the transfer had to happen through the heart. And so there's the whole story of that included in the book, and how the flames were transferred. And there were also flames that were transferred to India, and all of the ancient Vedic teachings and the ancient religion of India actually goes back, to more ancient civilizations. And we see a common theme around like different cultures, from the Celtic culture to some of the Mesoamerican cultures, and so forth. There are remnants or themes having to do with either Atlantis or Lemuria, depending on the culture. What's interesting, though, in both cultures to me is that the understanding of God as the sun, and so the Lemurians called their sun god Ra, just like the ancient Egyptians, Ra, R-A, Ra. The Atlanteans called him Incal, which is, in South America, you have the word Inca that comes from this, Inca, the civilization of where you have Machu Picchu and all of that. And so there was a true love of God as the sun, and of course the sun is reflected back in the flame within the heart, and so we see this understanding and appreciation of the sun coming back in ancient Egypt. It's very likely that the Sphinx, and now they're saying, as of the last month, I was reading some articles that say that they're saying the pyramids actually go way back before the 3,000 or 4,000 years that they had assigned to the pyramids. So these may have been, and most likely were around, including the Sphinx on Atlantis. That's what Edgar Cayce says. And he was the sleeping prophet who had a lot of visions. So we see, again, Egypt having this Golden Age civilization or culture with a lot of truth woven in. And then eventually that culture also gets taken over by Black magicians, which is one of the reasons why, and Black priests and priestesses, which is why Akhenaten had to try to bring the worship or the understanding or the cult of the sun back to the Egyptians. And we know he was an embodiment of our beloved Lanello. And so we see this happening again in Greece, the ancient, Golden Age of Greece, also having some of these awarenesses coming back. Plato talked about Atlantis and wrote about it. The ancient Greeks were aware of Atlantis as an island that went under the sea. And of course, it was a very big island. And so we look at the Greek mystery schools, Orpheism, and others, and we look at the work of Phidias, the sculptor Phidias, who sculpted the Parthenon, or erected the Parthenon and sculpted the statue of Pallas Athena in the center. We look at the age of Pericles and Aspasia, and all of the Golden Age of Greece, and it was, again, this soul memory that people had, where that these ones had. These were the adepts of the brotherhood, and they wanted to bring it back, because the intention of God is for us to have a golden age on earth as in heaven. In fact, when Jesus said, "Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven," in the Lord's Prayer, this is what we're talking about, bringing in the golden age into the physical plane, the golden age consciousness. And so as we move forward, we start to see that the founding fathers in America, our entire nation was founded upon the principles that would be to bring us into a golden age. The Declaration of Independence and our various, the Bill of Rights, the way our government is based on a threefold action of, the judicial and the executive and the legislative, and it's all of these various principles. A lot of the early Masons or Masonic traditions that were a part of America were actually tying into the Brotherhood of Light at the beginning, and once again got taken over and perverted and became dark. The eye of God that we see on our dollar bill is representing the all-seeing eye of God and the Elohim cyclopeia, and it has been taken over by the dark Illuminati. And so there's a great amount of confusion when we see these things, because people try to understand what's going on and they see everything that they call occult as bad, but occult was really hidden. And until the last century, all of the work of the Brotherhood of bringing in golden ages back into the earth was hidden, because the dispensation had not been given yet that was given in the 20th century to bring this awareness out to the general public, which is a dispensation that was given from higher levels of our divinity. And so when we look at the Golden Age, we understand that the Golden Age is happening in the retreats of the Brotherhood. It is happening in certain parts and levels of our planetary consciousness. Our souls, if we are tuned into the light, have access to these areas and spheres of development. And our job is to bring this into the physical plane. And one of the great tools that we were given is the gift that Saint Germain gave us of the violet flame. He introduced and sponsored the violet flame starting in the 1930s with the I Am movement. And the violet flame is a spiritual frequency that we can invoke that allows us to transmute the records, the heavy historical records of these past civilizations where they did go down, and to clear the way for the blueprint, the divine blueprint of Aquarius as a golden age to descend. Now, one of the things I put forth in the book is a warning, because the Ascended Masters have let us know and warned us that if Aquarius does not become an age of light, it can go very dark. And the will of God is always for us to have good and light and love and abundance and peace and all of those divine qualities, justice, divine justice. And our karma, our collective karma, as well as our daily decisions, end up determining where things go. And so the more we can invoke the violet flame through our free will by giving calls and mantras and decrees and prayers to the violet flame, songs like I'm a being of violet fire, I'm the purity God desires, the earth is a planet of violet fire, the earth is the purity God desires. And I do explain some of these calls and decrees in the book. The more we do this, the more we can help to accelerate the planet into a frequency that will enable us to mesh with the etheric plane. But it was also made very, very clear in the book, very clear by a number of Ascended Masters, that if we are not able to do this, if the darkness accelerates at a greater rate than the light, then we will have cataclysm, because cataclysm is God's way of purifying the planet. And the Ascended Masters have told us that cataclysm is the way that God will bring in a golden age, if it isn't through the violet flame. And so we have to understand how essential it is, not only for us to do the violet flame, but for this information to get out there, for people to really understand their cosmic responsibility, their soul responsibility, to make a difference to help bring in a golden age, because and a real one, which when we think of golden age, we need to think of golden rule. And so I know the term golden age has been touted about in political circles a lot lately, but if there's not the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, there's not the golden age. Other aspects of the golden age have to do with gold. Gold is precipitated sunlight, and golden age cultures and the golden age civilization that is intended to manifest will be based on gold and the gold standard, and not the hoarding of gold, but the free access of gold for all. And that's something that was happening in Atlantis and in some of the South American cultures and so forth. A lot of gold, and gold, people would wear gold, people would exchange, energy through gold, and it's got a God vibration. It's got a much higher vibratory rate than any other metal, and so it's important for us to understand these things, because if we don't have a golden age, golden rule society that is accelerated and transmuted through the violet flame, and brings in truly the kingdom of God on earth as in heaven, then we are most likely going to face cataclysm. And nobody ever believes cataclysm is going to happen. And that was clear when I was looking at these records of Lemuria. They were warned for hundreds of years sometimes. Same with Atlantis, same with different situations. I mean, even you look at what happened in Pompeii and other places where the cataclysms just come right down. And people's souls are taken out, and some are judged and no longer return. Some are allowed to reincarnate again. But the planet following these cataclysms is in a very difficult predicament, because until we can raise society again, and culture and music and art and everything, the economy, the buildings, all of it, until we can bring that knowledge back, it's you're living in a dark age. And I saw this also even with the medieval times. There was a great collective karma for the crucifixion of Christ. And so in the medieval times, we see a tremendous amount of heaviness and darkness that is only lightened by the Gothic cathedrals that were guilds of adepts who were building these incredible Gothic cathedrals. Other than that, the Enlightenment was pretty sparse. There were actually, interestingly enough, a golden age of Islam happening during the medieval European times, where in the Arabic lands, they were actually trying to precipitate golden age consciousness, culture, cooperation, science, religion, and poetry and art, and all of the beauty of classical culture, even with a more Oriental flair. So we can see how it took a long time for us to get to the Renaissance. And when the Renaissance came, I remember studying it in my history classes, and I was like, oh, it's a breath of fresh air. Finally, we're at the Renaissance. Thank God we finally made it to the Renaissance. Well, then, but then things keep going, and you've got the ups and downs again, and the various revolutions, and the so-called Age of Enlightenment that happened in the 1800s with the various music that came in. And then what happened, which was most detrimental, but was allowed by God to happen, was that at the end of the 1950s, souls began to incarnate who had been locked up in compounds on the astral plane since the sinking of Atlantis. And these souls were allowed to come in one more time, to be given one more opportunity to choose light rather than darkness. And the lords of karma believed that, just like with the laggards coming from Maldek, that when these souls would incarnate, that the rest of the population would have enough good sense about them to help them come up higher and not go down with them. And unfortunately, all these situations, they have had more negative influence on the population than the population had positive influence on them. And what I'm talking about is the entire sex, drugs, and rock and roll culture of the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and now going into rock music, rap music, everything, all of the misuses of science, rhythm, music, all of these things that we see, the genetic engineering, we even see cannibalism, which is so sad to see. We see all kinds of perversions of the life force in so many areas, and perversions of the consciousness of the people and of the children and of the youth through foul cartoons and just terrible video games and things that are seeking to take away their innocence and their spoil their third eye vision of God, of the etheric plane. And then we see all of the AI robot neural link and all of these various things coming to the fore, where again it's to create a godless society based on mechanization concept, which is something the Mass of the Great Divine Director talks about. And it's a real issue. It's a real problem. And so we have to, those of us who are of the light and interested in being vanguards of the light, and bring in that golden age of Aquarius for real, and not as some kind of phony, fake, preempting of the cycle. We have to really engage in the violet flame. We have to really keep looking at our God and qualifying everything in our life with that will of God and that determination to be one pointed for God and for the will of God. And we have to do everything we can to reach the youth and others. And so this is why we're doing this work. I mean, ultimately, no one knows for sure which way it's going to go, but we know for sure that we're going to have a golden age, and we know for sure that God has said that Earth would be saved. That was also given to us in one of these teachings. Now, how it comes about and what people in the physical plane have to go through to get there is really another matter. And what we can see again and again is that God is more interested in the victory of the soul, and the soul through free will choosing light rather than darkness, than God is interested in our human material comforts. And that can sound, unnerving, and of course to the human it does. But we have to understand that at a higher level, we're all accountable, and we're all going to either be moving into the etheric plane, or souls are going to be lost in the astral plane. And one of the teachings I came across recently was that Elizabeth Clare Prophet was teaching that more than 90% of the souls don't even make it to the etheric plane between embodiments. And so what we see around us is a lot of unreality, because the only thing that's really real is the etheric plane. And so what we see is we're living in a matrix or a construct that isn't really real. But like Mark Prophet says, evil is not real, its appearance has no power, but if you're not careful, it can kill you. And we have to understand that the souls can be lost through this unreal matrix, and especially the souls of the youth, and we have to really pray for them. So we're we understand these things. And one more point I wanted to bring up, and then I'll take any questions you might have, is that there was one of the planets I describe in the book is the violet planet, and the violet planet is a planet, and I don't know where it is in space. It's probably part of our galaxy. It had a similar predicament that we face now, and a small amount of people there, priests and priestesses of the sacred fire, started to invoke a lot of violet flame, and through their assistance and the assistance of the heavenly host, they were able to turn their planet around. And we've had a number of dictations coming from Omritas, who is the ruler of the violet planet, and he has offer to help and to help multiply our work. And so we have to be, it's always a very fine line, middle way, razor's edge when we read all of these things, because yes, we have to understand what's really upon us and take it very seriously, but we also have to not bring it about through fear or over concern. We still have to believe in the power of miracles and the power of the violet flame and the power of the multiplication that takes place through angelic hosts. And so this is really a glorious exercise in free will and in sharing the word, sharing the good news of the gospel of Aquarius. And so that's what I wanted to share off the top of my head, which was actually a lot. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer.
I just want to share one
I
thing
cannot hear
that
you.
Elizabeth, I wanted to share one thing that Elizabeth Clare Prophet said, which is that what you see, you will become, and holding the immaculate vision, the immaculate concept. I don't know if you wanted to share on that at all.
Well, that's a very important point. And the Immaculate Concept is what Mother Mary holds for each and every one of us. And we do need to hold the Immaculate Matrix for each and every one of us as much as possible, and for the planet and for the elementals. And we also have to not be naive. Like it, again, it's a very fine middle way where I personally think the Immaculate Concept is something that is on one level, and then on another level, like Mark Prophet said, evil is not real and its appearance has no power, but if you're not careful, it can kill you. So we have to have both understandings going on. We need to hold that matrix that God is more powerful, and we will not take no for an answer, and we will demand that divinity have its victory on planet Earth. And then we also have to be judicious and aware as we look around us, to make the calls and to not be like an ostrich with our head in the sand. We have to be careful because, because we have to really, as sons and daughters of God, be able to see and know and understand, and then make right calls, and do it from a place of a higher responsibility. Does that help?
Yeah, and you mentioned the violet flame. How can we find out more?
Well, there are a lot of books and teachings and videos out there on the violet flame. If you go to YouTube, there are a number of videos and decrees published by the Summit Lighthouse. There are some that were published through the I Am movement. I've published some. If you go to my books, if you go to booksforaquarius.com, you will see a number of books that I've written and their websites and songs of the violet flame. There are different YouTube channels out there. There are a lot of people who are doing violet flame work now. And so, type of violet flame, you'll see a lot of things. I have done a lot of work, but many other people have as well. And of course, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, Mark Prophet, and before them, the I Am movement did a tremendous amount of work with the violet flame. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't even have heard of the violet flame. So definitely want to give credit where credit is due, and refer you back to the original source as much as possible. But also, we were told it's important to be creative with the violet flame. We can sing it, we can dance it, we can write poetry to it, we can give mantras, we can visualize it. And we see a lot of that creativity happening online now, with people taking the violet flame and running with it. And I think it's all valuable.
That's wonderful, wonderful. Um, what just I guess the last thing I'd want to ask is, what's the best hope for someone who feels like they've made big mistakes in their life?
I think so many of us have made big mistakes, if it wasn't in this life, in other lives. And the most important thing is contrition, having a heart and soul that says, God, I really messed up here. Can you please help me? I want to do better. And I know that God doesn't hold it against us if we are truly willing to change. One of the important things is to have the humility to recognize where we are mistaken. I remember a teaching that Elizabeth Clare Prophet gave one time where she said the mark or the sign of a fallen one is somebody who cannot say I'm sorry, who cannot apologize, who cannot bring themselves to have that awareness of wanting to change. And we see that even nowadays when all this talk on psychopaths and other horrible things are going on. I mean, you look at people and you say, do they have the humility to say, I'm sorry? Do they have the humility to bend the knee to Christ? Do they have the humility to be willing to admit mistakes and start over? Or are they continuously projecting, a patina of invincibility? And I mean, that is really the big difference between Archangel Michael and Lucifer, in dialogues with the devil. Archangel Michael bent the knee to God and said, God, help me. And he was delivered, and he was able to deliver the etheric plane from the influence and the reality of the fallen ones, who were then cast into earth. They were cast into earth. We read about that in the book of Revelation. But Archangel Michael had the humility when he was confronted with Lucifer initially, who was his older brother. He had the humility to fall to his knees and say, God, help me, because he didn't know how to handle it. And I've had many times in my life where I've dropped my knees and said, God, help me, because I had no way personally, humanly, of handling things. And so I think we have to never forget that when we are humble and we really invoke the presence of our divinity to take command, that we have become the co-creators with God that God wants us to be. God wants to deliver us and love us and help us, but it needs to be invited in. And then sometimes God does test us also. It's important to understand that especially as you advance on the path, things are not going to necessarily just be hunky-dory and easy and just have this amazing flow because you're just, so fantastic that you walk with God. You're going to get tested. You're going to get tested by the devil, just like Job was. You're going to get tested by God too, to see what, will you lean into these temptations or not? I mean, Jesus was tempted in the wilderness, and it's the same for all of us. And then ultimately we do go through initiations like the dark night of the soul, the dark night of the spirit. And so the walk with God is a trial in itself in a way, but we're being tried just like the fire tries every man's works, of which sort it is, and we're being tried in the fire. Ultimately, we are to become a flame. We are to become fire. We are beings of fire who are becoming fire. And when we have fully become the flame that we're intended to be, we will be the fullness of the ascension that is our ultimate permanent crystallization in God. And those who are not interested in following that path of full oneness with divinity, end up being eventually consumed also by that flame, but there's nothing left to them because they have chosen unreality as the direction of their life. And so I don't think God ever gives up on us if we I know God doesn't give up on us if we truly call upon the Lord.
You mentioned the ascension. What is that?
The ascension. The ascension is the final reunion of the soul with God. And the ascension is where it's a ritual that takes place on the etheric plane, but that Jesus demonstrated even here in the physical, and so did Mother Mary. And they call it the Assumption, but it was her ascension. And it's where the soul reunites with God and no longer has to re-embody. Gautama Buddha talked about the wheel of rebirth and how we want to transcend dukkha, which is suffering, and the wheel of rebirth. And he gave us the path first of the Eightfold Path and the teachings of Buddhism, which inspired Jesus. If you read my book, the Gospel of Aquarius, you will start to understand, and this is at gospelaquarius.com, you will understand how much Jesus and Gautama Buddha really had in common, and I've written other books on that as well. It's really important to understand that there's a way, thanks to our beloved Gautama Buddha there, and then Jesus and the various great lights of history, spiritual history, that there is a way that they have demonstrated that is ours to also demonstrate, to become permanently one with God and to not have to keep reincarnating, because we've finally fully integrated with our divinity. And that's what the ascension process is. It's a ritual that takes place primarily at the retreat of Serapis Bay, which is an etheric retreat over Luxor, Egypt. And then that's for this planet. And then you're moving on into the heaven world, but you have permanently become an ascended master, as opposed to a soul who visits the etheric plane and then has to come back or go between the two. So it's a very important initiation, and it's available to those who, study the path of the ascension, practice it, become it, and do the violet flame for sure for the transmutation of karma, because you can't ascend if you don't have at least 51% of your karma balanced. And that's one of the requirements. And the Master Serapis Bey gives us a very good delineation of the requirements of the ascension in his book Dossier on the Ascension, and also in his various dictations, as have other masters.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I wanted to just remind you, if you want to check out this book on the ancient civilizations in ascended master culture, it's available at Golden Age of Aquarius.com. And I'm giving these books for free because they are so important, and I want to make the good karma, and I want to make sure that everybody can read them. Of course, they're also available on Amazon if you want to purchase the hard copy, but you can certainly check it out, even read the whole thing online with all of my books. If you go to booksforaquarius.com, I've got almost 20, I think now, maybe more, I don't know, somewhere around there. But anyway, you can look at them, you can explore them, you can read them. And that's part of the work I want to do for raising up the planet into a golden age of Aquarius, along with other songs and poems and things that I have, websites and so forth that I've built. So, yeah.
You're one of the most productive people I've ever met. God bless
Well,
you.
God in me, I tell you, when the fire is on me to get something done, it's like there's no saying no. But first of all, it's the greatest joy that there is. Second of all, it's an absolute responsibility. And I tell you, this book came together in a relatively short period of time, like I would say in about a month. I mean, after having done the Gospel of Aquarius, which was a huge project that took like 3 months, then this one was like, I had like a month to 6 weeks to wrap it up. And I had to go through so many levels of research, but it was like I was living it. I was literally living these ancient civilizations, and I was starting to realize, oh my goodness, this is what we're really dealing with. This is what it's really about. And there's been a lot of misinformation out there. For example, I heard recently people were saying, well, the Atlantis fell because of socialism and communism. That's not a fact. The fact is Atlantis fell because of the misuse of rock music and science and the perversions in the temples and so forth. So it's important to get our facts straight, because then we can then we can better understand what's going on. Now, of course, that I'm not endorsing socialism or communism. The Ascended Masters have said that we have to be aware of the international capitalist communist conspiracy. Both sides work together. Both sides on the extremes are dark. They're both, and then they work against each other as a Gog and Magog to trap the children of the light. And we have to break through that and understand that, you know, good is going back to invoking the violet flame, living the golden rule as best we can, and and making the calls. Whatever you see on the planet, whatever you see in the news, make the calls. Call to the angels. Call to God. Call to Sanat Kumara. Call to the masters in heaven that you work with. Call to Jesus to come and take command. Take command of this, Mother Mary. Take command of that, Jesus. Take command of that. I see this. I mean, there are days where I make calls almost continuously because I feel so burdened by what I see going on in the news. And I know that this is my power. I can make the calls, and every call the angels are answering. And so this is very, very important for us to understand, because it is the will of God for us to have a golden age. It's going to happen. And it's the will of God, preferably, for us to have it happen through the physical plane. I mean, imagine the beauty of this planet still in so many areas, and the Elohim and the elementals that created it and that look after it, and all of the achievements of human culture and civilization and knowledge that we have this far. And we want to preserve these and to give acknowledgement to the technologies and all of those things that came from the retreats, like the internet and so many other beautiful technologies, and all of these teachings that have been given to us, like the teachings of the Ascended Masters, the Violet Flame. We don't want to lose all of that. We want all of this to be sublimated into the etheric plane, and we want our children and our grandchildren and subsequent generations to be able to just keep moving forward from there. So we don't want to get so bogged down by all of the ultimate unreality of evil that we see around us right now. And one of my prayers these days, as we see all of these things coming out in the news, is to say, God, protect the minds and the hearts and the vision of those who are being exposed to all this, so that they can hold that higher vision of you and of your will and of ultimate God good prevailing over evil. And we don't know how much evil we may have to go through before we get there, but we know that ultimately, I mean, even if you get to the end of the book of Revelation, it says, I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the ending. And, the New Jerusalem descends as a bride prepared for her husband. So there is hope, and there is hope in this ultimate victory of divinity that takes place either in our life and in our soul or in a larger collective. And that's what we claim, and that's what we know to be true. And one way or the other, like the masters have said, we're all going home, and whether we go home with our consciousness fine-tuned in God or our consciousness dissolved in God, we're going home. So that's the most important thing to remember, that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I think we should end here now. It's a good place to end. And I really recommend that you go and check out these books, because so much self-awareness and greater awareness can come to you. I know, because I walked through it, and this awareness came to me as I was working through it. And it's really a part of our collective history, our collective soul history, our collective planetary history, our collective solar system and galactic history. We need to know what is really, the equation here before us. So, yeah. Thank you, Pamela.
God bless you.
God bless you. Have a wonderful day.
You too.